Hello, fourth grade. Welcome back. We are going to pick up with our book, Wringer by Jerry Spinelli. And we left off at chapter 7. I'm going to read you the last paragraph so you kind of remember where we left off. He was not aware of turning the ceiling light off and the night light on. He was not aware that he ever stopped crying. In his sleep, a voice echoed down the long, dark barrel of a cannon, "You have run out of birthdays." And in the morning, he awoke suddenly to a flutter of wings. So we left off where Palmer had had his birthday, and he was really excited. The boys came, they gave him a nickname, and he got the treatment. But in the back of his mind is still, when he turns 10, he's going to have to be a ringer. So we're going to start with chapter 7. The following weeks were like a parade to Palmer, with himself as Grand Marshal. He felt as if he were marching down the middle of a broad boulevard with crowds of people cheering from the sidewalks. Calls of, "Hey Palmer! Hey Snots!" flew across the summer days. From blocks around, kids came to see his arm. Little kids would gather around, 4 or 5 at a time. He would lift his sleeve and they would gasp and go, "Wow." Some of them would reach out to touch, and the squeamish ones would pull back their hands as if from a hot stove, and they would shudder and squeak. Big kids did not touch. They simply looked and nodded in grim respect, remembering their own treatment, and Palmer's heart would swell. Within 3 days, he could lift his left hand to his nose. At the end of a week, he could reach above his head. He was almost sorry he was healing. He enjoyed showing off to little kids. "Look, I can't lift my arm any higher than this." He enjoyed the amazement in their eyes. He wished the bruise would not go away. He wished he could make them feel the tingle in his fingertips. And one day, he darkened the diminishing bruise with a bit of purple crayon. One person was missing during his imaginary parade down the boulevard, Dorothy Grusick. And for some reason, this bothered Palmer. Several times he saw her playing hopscotch in front of her house. Like Palmer, she was good at playing by herself. Of course, Palmer had buddies now, so he would never have to play alone again, not if he didn't want to. He wondered if girls grouped up like boys. The first couple of times that Palmer walked past, Dorothy did not even look up from her hopscotch. This was very unusual. Dorothy had always said hi. So the next time Palmer said it, "Hey," Dorothy just went on hopping one-footed, brown ponytail bobbing. She's mad because I didn't invite her to my birthday party, thought Palmer. And that was understandable, but beside the point. The point was getting her to look at the bruise. And the more she would not look, the more Palmer wanted her to. Finally, he rolled his left sleeve up to the shoulder and plopped himself down on her front steps. She went on playing, tossing a green beanbag into the chalk-numbered squares, ignoring him. At last, he thought of something funny to say. "Who's winning?" She said nothing. She tossed the beanbag to the farthest square and hopped on down and back. She tossed the bag out again, and just when it seemed she would never speak, she said, "Thanks for inviting me to your party." It made no sense, but Palmer was thrilled to hear her voice. "It was all boys," he said. "Good," she said, with a disdainful sniff. Sometimes it amazed him that this girl, just out of 3rd grade, could make him feel so little. She went on hopping. "Did you hear my new name?" he said. She did not answer. She did not look up. "It's Snots." A short, snorty chuckle burst from her nose, and then she was stone-faced again. He turned so his left arm was fully facing her, so she couldn't miss it. "I got the treatment, too." She went on hopping. "For 3 days, I could only move my arm up to here." She didn't even look. "Do you want to see my bruise?" Her eyes never left the green beanbag. He stood, he smiled. "Want to touch it?" It was as if he wasn't there. So he ran off and found others to marvel at his bruise. He played with the guys, and when they came to taunt Dorothy, he didn't feel as bad as he did before. They called her fish face and made fun of her name and kicked her beanbag off the hopscotch squares. Palmer stood back and gave a sly grin. "That'll teach you, Dorothy Grusick." At the same time, she befuddled him. Not once did she raise her eyes to her tormentors or say anything back. She did not run into her house. She did not cry. What kind of girl was this? She just kept playing hopscotch, as if no one else was there. After a while, Beans could not take any more fun, so they all ran off. In the third week after the treatment, Palmer came to the end of his imaginary parade. His bruise had faded to a dim yellowish blot, and the crowds had gone home. But something was still there. Palmer knew what it was. It had been there all along, silent, hardly seen among the cheering crowd. A flash of black feather now and then, and an orange eye waiting. As he kicked his checkered soccer ball along the streets, he could feel it lurking in shadowy doorways, behind shaded windows. He would not look. He felt it come out of the shadows, and the sunlight on the back of his neck turned to frost. It was behind him. He picked up his ball and ran. But he could not run from time. It was the first week in August. Family Fest had arrived. And think for a minute what's going to happen at Family Fest. It happens on the soccer field. And it's something that he should be looking forward to, but he's not. Chapter 8. Family Fest. Such a nice name. And a nice time it was. A week of talent contests and softball games and races and tilt-a-whirl and bumper cars and music and barbecue and cotton candy and shooting pigeons. If only Family Fest would stop on Friday, Palmer had often wished. But it did not. It began on Monday and it ended on Saturday. And that Saturday, the first Saturday in August, 1 month after his birthday, was the worst day of the year. During the night before, trucks could be heard rumbling through the streets, carrying wooden crates from the old railroad station to the soccer field. The crates held pigeons, 5,000 of them. Except on that day, Palmer had never seen a pigeon in his town. Some he heard were trapped in the railroad yards of the great city 100 miles to the east. The rest were bought and paid for. Why anyone would pay for a pigeon only to shoot it was just one of the many questions about Pigeon Day that bewildered Palmer. Palmer's first Pigeon Day had occurred when he was 4. Certain moments 5 years later were still with him. The birds in the sky, then suddenly not in the sky, only feathers fluttering. The red fingers and lips of a man cheering, spewing specks of barbecued chicken. A man wearing a bright pink baseball cap, and the smell of gun smoke. And most of all, the pigeons. The one pigeon that hurried across the grass lopsided, as Palmer would have said when he was little, as if one leg had been kicked out from under it, hurrying, hobbling, wobbling in goofy loops, tilting like a sailboat blown over, a boy chasing after, running and reaching, the boy laughing, the people laughing, little Palmer thinking, the boy wants it for a pet. And then the pigeon was coming this way, flopping, righting itself, hobbling straight for the people, head bobbing, loppy-siding on a curving course, and the people were shrieking and calling, "Wringer! Wringer!" And the boy was chasing, and sure enough, the boy caught it. Caught that hobbly-wobbling pigeon right in front of Palmer, and the pigeon's eye looked at Palmer, and the pigeon's eye was orange, and everyone clapped, and Palmer clapped too, and he laughed out loud and called, "Goody!" And then the boy closed his hands over the pigeon's neck and twisted his hands real quick like that, and Palmer heard a tiny sound. like when a twig was stepped on, and when the boy took one hand away, the pigeon's head hung down toward the green grass, so sadly dangled down, though the pigeon's eye was still round and orange. Palmer had turned and looked up at his mother and said, "Why did he do that?" And his mother had said, "To put the pigeon out of its misery." "Was the pigeon in misery?" Palmer asked his mother. "Yes," she said. "Why?" said Palmer. His mother did not answer. She was looking at the sky. "Because he was lumpy-sided?" She smiled thinly and she nodded. "Yes." "That boy didn't want him for a pet, did he?" His mother kept looking at the sky, kept not answering. Palmer began to notice a gray, sour smell in the air. Suddenly, his mother grabbed his hand and pulled him away. As they squeezed through the crowd, the happy faces of people, and the cheers and laughter and the fingers red from barbecue sauce, gave Palmer the feeling that he was leaving a party. The boy, Palmer learned later, was called a ringer. It was his job to put the wounded pigeons out of their misery. During the following year, Palmer thought about that quite often. If the wounded pigeons were in misery, why put them there in the first place by shooting them? Why not just let them all fly away? Palmer's mother had no answer to these questions, so Palmer thought about it some more and concluded that all pigeons must be miserable, wounded or not, and that was why they must be shot. And perhaps the pigeons themselves knew this. Perhaps when the boxes were open and they flew into the sky over the soccer field, they were not trying to fly away at all. They were simply giving the shooters a good target, and they were saying, "Here we are, put us out of our misery." How sad to be a pigeon, and how nice of the people that they would stop at nothing to help. They would shoot and ring, and Palmer imagined, punch and hand grenade and bayonet if they had to, anything to end the poor bird's misery. And this, Palmer guessed, was why the people were so happy, because every dangling orange-eyed head was one less miserable creature to weigh heavy on their hearts. Heaven, Palmer thought with a smile, must be teeming with pigeons. On the mantel of a fake fireplace in the den of Palmer's house stood a statue of a pigeon. It was golden. It was beautiful. Words were etched into a shiny panel below the statue. Palmer could not yet read, so he pretended that the words said, "In honor of all pigeons, this house loves you." But the questions did not stop. Killing the pigeons and putting them out of their misery stubbornly refused to mean the same thing. Palmer thought about misery, and it seemed to him that a shotgun was not the only way to end it. When Palmer was miserable, for example, his mother or father would hold him close and wipe his tears. And when Palmer's mother or father put him out of his misery, they didn't shoot him, they offered him a cookie. Why then on Pigeon Day did the people bring guns instead of cookies? It was confusing. Was Daddy a ringer? Palmer asked his mother one day. After a minute she said, "Better ask your father." So he asked his father, "Daddy, were you a ringer?" His father looked at him and said, "Yep." "Will I be a ringer too?" His father gave a snappy nod and said, "Sure thing, big guy." Sure thing. Palmer pronounced the words over and over in the days that followed. Sure thing. Boys became ringers, he heard, when they became 10 years old. So in that chapter, when Palmer was little, he had an experience, and he didn't understand why they would want to put the pigeons out of their misery. And if you remember from the earlier chapters, Palmer's dad was kind of big on him getting the treatment and getting the nickname, and his dad was proud to be a ringer. So Palmer has this confusion about how he feels about being a ringer, but also wanting his dad to be proud of him. Sure thing. Boys became ringers, he heard, when they became 10 years old. Now we're going to stop there, and we're going to pick up again on chapter 9. I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you're reminding your friends to get on to Google Classroom and listen to the story. So I will see you again, and we're going to read chapters 9 through 12, and then we will actually be done with the first part of the book. Goodbye, 4th grade.